am recording the slate right now.
Today is August 1st, 2023. We are interviewing Solange Lebovitz. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Lebovitz is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States, and the language will be English.
Okay. And then we stopped recording, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready?
Yes.
Just give me a 3, 2, 1, and we'll rock and roll.
Okay, stand by, Esther, and 3, 2, 1.
Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, and can you please spell it?
Solange, Solange, Lebovitz, Lebovitz.
And what was your name at birth?
Marie, Marie, Dratler, Dratler.
How was your name changed?
Well, my mother was in the hospital and she had a blood clot, and she wanted to give me a Hungarian name, Shari, which is Hungarian, but the nurse never understood such a name, and she wrote down Mary. So I became Marie Dratler, which my mother changed later, Solange, after my Hebrew name, which was Soura, Soura.
Where were you born?
I was born in Paris, France.
And when?
France. August 6th, 1930.
And forgive me for asking, but how old are you?
In a couple of days, I'll be 93.
Had your family lived in France for many generations?
No, not at all. My parents actually were born in Szeged, Transylvania, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at one time, and then they were under the Hungarian government, and after the First World War, they were under the Romanian government, because the Hungarians who were allied with Germany in the First World War, they lost the war.
When did your family leave Szeged, and why?
Well, my father really came from a large and poor family. His father died while he was a baby, and his mother sent him to another city where an older brother taught him the trade, learning how to make boots and shoes, boots and leather shoes. At the time, he worked himself up, and he was able, after he married my mother, Rosa Davidovici Eshkovitz, to build a beautiful property that he had bought, a big house where he had cars, vegetables, everything he was growing, and they had a very good life. However, but my mother came from a different family. My grandfather, Shimshon Hershkovitz, had a bakery, and he helped them to get a little bit settled. The reasons my mother and father had to leave Szeged was because there was very much unrest under the Romanian government. And the people, the peasants, were against the Jews, and business people were also against the Jews. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, but mostly there was a company, the Bata Shoe Company, that came across the bridge of the river Tissa, where they had ready-made shoes. And now the cottage industry was on the wane. My father could not compete with those companies because, first of all, as a child, except for Hebrew and Yiddish, he never learned how to read or write, except Yiddish and Hebrew. So he was unable to compete. And so he had to let go of his 15 workers, and he had to sell the house. And many people in that town, Siget, where they didn't have any future, they left to go abroad. Some came to the United States, South America, France. So my father would have liked to come to the United States. And my mother contacted a aunt, my father's sister, who had moved to Boston. But she did not advise that he should come without his wife and children. They had 4 children born in Siget, because she says they maybe wouldn't find any work. So my mother decided he shouldn't go abroad over the sea, and instead he should come to France, because France had lost a lot of their soldiers and they needed workers. And at that time, they promised work for East European and also Italians. So my father decided to come by himself to Paris first. I have more to say, but maybe you have a question.
You can continue if you want. I do
Okay.
have a question, but please continue.
Okay, so my father came first to Paris, France. He couldn't join a company making shoes because everything was automatic and he didn't speak the language and he couldn't learn. So he worked for different companies. He was not happy about it. He didn't like the whistling of leaving the company, and he thought that it would be better for my mother and their 4 children to stay maybe in Siget, where fresh air, and her father and his mother still lived. But eventually, my mother decided, upon the advice of her father, that she should come to Paris with her 4 children. So she sold everything, like the second house they had bought, her furniture, everything, because the Romanian, under the Romanian government, they had agents that came all the time to check and would give them some fines for not observing the laws. So finally, my mother sold everything what she had. She had struggled with 4 children in Siget, and then she came to Paris. And of course, as immigrants, like any immigrant that came to New York in the United States, it was extremely difficult for them. They were immigrants, they didn't speak the language, they didn't have any money, they had to find some rooms or eventually a small apartment. And it was a very, very difficult time for them and the 4 children.
I'd like to stay in Szeged for just one moment.
Yes,
Szeged is famous because of Elie Wiesel.
yes.
Did your family know his family?
Well, I'm sure my parents knew the family of Elie Wiesel because they lived not far and they had a little grocery store out of their house. But Elie Wiesel knew my grandfather, Shimshon Ershkovitz, who had a bakery. Since he had a bakery on the main street, they called it Ziganer Gas, everybody knew my grandfather. Now, how do I know that he knew my grandfather? It's because one of my sisters, Bert, who is a year older, who is still alive now, she's 94, went to see him with her husband at a conference he was giving in Paris. And when she went to speak with him, and she said she's the granddaughter of Shimshon Ershkovitz, right away he kissed her and said, "I knew your grandfather very well." That's all I know.
You told me about your father's occupation, and I just want to make sure that we have both of your parents' names.
Yes.
Could you say them slowly?
Right. My father's name was Isaac, E-I-Z-I-C-K, I think, or K, Dratler, D-R-A-T-L-E-R. My mother's name, before she married my father, was Rosa Davidovici, D-A-V-I-D-O-V-I-C-I, Ershkovitz, E-R-H-E-R-S, maybe H or K-O-V-I-T-Z. It seems that the people under the Austro-Hungarian government at the time before, they were not allowed to marry. The government there, the king, they did not allow the Jews to propagate the Jews. So usually, in order, they did get married, but they kept their name. So my mother's name went over Davidovici, and my grandfather's name went under, my grandmother's name was Davidovici, and my grandfather's name was Ershkovitz. So my mother went under Davidovici Ershkovitz in Szeged, before she married my father and Rosa Dratler, D-R-A-T-L-E-R. Now, she was born August 1897, while my father was born July 29, 1890 in Szeged.
What religious traditions did your family observe?
They were Orthodox. For example, when my mother cooked and made cholent, which is a, Yiddish dish, they used to carry it to my grandfather's bakery, and the boys would go and pick it up in the morning, and then she would put it under what they call the dochana, the quilt, until they came back from shul and would eat it. That's the way it was done.
You mentioned some of the difficulties that your parents when they came to France.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how they were treated by the French people when they came?
Just a minute, I have to drink a glass of water.
Take your time.
When I talk for a while, I get dehydrated. When they came to Paris, at first, the government had asked all those foreign people to come and to work. So, but the Jewish people were never allowed to get the French citizenship, which would allow them to have the same privileges as the French population, the Christian population, unless they converted. And if they did not convert, what it was called, it was a small nation within the big nation. The rabbis and the court, their own court, handled their problems. They couldn't go to the French court. They were not considered like French citizens.
What are some of your early memories of your childhood in Paris? What can you remember?
Well, let's see. I was born in 1930. I went to public school. Now, I mentioned before that 4 of the children were born in Siget, and they had a very, very difficult time to adjust in school because they didn't speak the language. And when they went to school, there was anti-Semitism from the French children because since they spoke Yiddish, they thought they were German from the First World War. So they called them sale Bosch, dirty Bosch. And they called not just the Jews, but even the Italians there, they called them macaroni. So my sir Bert Dratler, who was born a year before me, we went to French school, public school, and I don't remember any Semitism at all at the time. I remember in the school that as a child, I probably talked too much and they would punish me and put me in the corner with my hands. That's all I can remember as far as I went to school. However, when the war, which was in 1939, in September 1939, I was not home because I was a sickly child. So the doctor at the dispenser decided that I should be sent in the mountains in a preventorium. A preventorium is not a sanatorium. A sanatorium is where you have sort of rehab people like you have in Switzerland and sicker people. A preventorium was just to prevent illness, and that they believed that the fresh air, being in the mountain and not exposed to a small apartment's fumes, let's say, would be beneficial to you. So they sent me in a certain part of middle France, which was called Corrèze, Correze, not far from Uzerche, and that place was called Le Glandier, Glandier. Now, over the years, of course, I checked it on the computer and it does not exist anymore. But they still mention Le Glandier, which has been changed to something else. It's no more a preventorium. So, I was there in September 1939. Of course, at the time, there was the war. And I didn't know what the war was. And I was supposed to be sent back to Paris, France. But because of the war, I was not sent until probably end of 39 or beginning of 1940. And with other children also. And my father was waiting for me at the train station. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember your parents talking about events in Germany under Hitler before September of 39?
You know, I was a small child. I was the youngest. My parents spoke at home mostly Yiddish or Hungarian and spoke to us in French. So even if they did talk about it, I don't know. But I think that all their lives, they did read the newspaper, the Vorwort, which is the forward now in the United States. So I think they were very much aware of all the information, and also they belong to an organization which they helped fund in Paris. You know, the Lens people, where the Hungarian people would meet once a year at a ball. I remember as a child being there with all these people in Paris who were Hungarian.
Sorry.
No.
Can you explain what the forward is? I know, but would you please explain what it is?
The forward, which at the time in Paris was called the Vorwort, like in Yiddish, was a Jewish newspaper giving the Jewish people information of what was happening, I guess, all over the world, or about the war in Poland, or whatever it was. I didn't know about it, but I know my parents, even when they came to visit me in the United States in 1974 and 1975, I have a picture of them looking on at the table and looking and reading the forward newspaper. So all their lives, I think, they must have kept in touch with the events happening in the world.
What else stands out in your mind about your family and your life before the war began? Do you have any other memories that you want to share?
Well, the thing that you mean in France? Can I say if it's related also to the war?
Whatever you remember about your childhood in France.
Okay. What I remember, we lived in a poor neighborhood. My parents could not afford, they didn't speak well the language, and my father had to work. And there was a problem because the French government, which had welcomed the immigrants, now were against them because the French people, there was anti-Semitism, and they blamed all the foreigners for their problems. So the government decided that any company, before they could hire a Jew, they would have to hire first 10 French people. So my father, who had been working at the time for a furniture company run by an Italian, by the way, was laid off. And he didn't know what he was going to do. Here he had 6 children. He couldn't get the French citizenship. He couldn't work without a permit. And he was very despondent. My father was a very, very courageous man, so was my mother. They didn't let bad events affect them. And my father was very smart, even though he didn't read and write other languages except Hebrew and Yiddish. He decided to send my oldest daughter, Yolande, who was an excellent student and already had passed her diploma, Certificat d'études primaires, at the age of 14. He took her to the Minister of Work, and she stood there in line while he was watching her. And at first the policeman noticed her age, didn't want her to stay in line, but she insisted, and eventually she was allowed to go in with my father to see the Minister of Work, to explain the situation. And my father told her to say that if he doesn't have a permit to work as an artisan, as a worker for himself, what could he do? Throw himself in the river? So the Minister of Work took all the information and ordered his subordinate, his worker, to take all the information, and eventually my father got a permit of work for himself as an artisan. He could work for himself. He could go to people, advertise, get jobs from anybody. And what he did at the time, he returned to the company RIZA, R-I-Z-Z-A, to ask him to give him some work that he could take in his own place. Where we live in the courtyard, there was down on the first, he rented a big, big room, very cold. He had the, painted plaster and everything. He installed a little stove so that it shouldn't be too cold because he wanted to varnish. He had learned a new trade, varnishing furniture, which he did very, very well. And so he installed everything so that he could start working for himself. And also, he was a very smart man. We had lots, there were poor people living in that courtyard, Italian, Algerians, and what he did, he told my older sister, Yolande, to get forms to fill out for the Italians so that they could apply for also to get permits of work. So he didn't think just about himself, but about the poor people in the courtyard.
What do you remember about the German invasion?
Okay. Oh, now, I was not in Paris at the time of the invasion. My sister Berthe and I, who were both born in Paris, France, we were sent in a colony, well, called like a camp, school camp, near the ocean on the Atlantic. It was called Pornichet, Pornichet, and we were there at the ocean when the Germans came, and of course the Henri-Philippe Pétain, who capitulated very quickly, and he was a collaborator of Hitler in France. So while I was there at the ocean, I remember we stayed in a little castle. And I remember one day we were not allowed to go and play on the beach because the Germans, there were English soldiers. I mean, at that time, England and France and other countries, Australia and Canada, had joined the war against Germany, Hitler. And they had English soldiers there, you know, on the Atlantic. And they wanted to return, of course, to England. But they were bombed on their way. And so their bodies were left on the beach. And I remember that we were not allowed, the children, to go on the beach because all the adults were busy trying to get the bodies of the English soldiers. And eventually, my father came to pick us up, my sister Berthe and me, and we went back to Paris, and we went back to public school for a short while. Although I have, if I may, when I went to school, the school there were very, very regimented, very strict, not like here in the United States. But I had one teacher, I forgot her name unfortunately, she was Jewish and she was laid off because at that time all the official people, you know, lawyer, judge, doctors, everybody, engineer, they were not allowed to work anymore. It was a terrible time in France because who knows how they were going to be able to make a living. So she was let out. And I remember that one day, some of the children and me, we went to visit her in her apartment. May I ask for a glass of water? Karen, do you mind going and get me a glass of cold water from the sink?
Okay. Yeah.
From the sink. So, where was I? Okay.
You went to visit the teacher.
Oh yeah, I went to
her
visit the teacher. And I remember distinctly that she kept looking at me. Maybe I was the only Jewish child. My name, Dratler, would indicate that my parents were foreigners. So I remember distinctly that she kept looking at me. And apparently she was a teacher, and she probably already knew from the event that had happened in Poland that it was bad for the Jewish people. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you how things had changed. You had been away at a camp, and then you came back to Paris. What changes did you notice when you got back with your family?
With my family. At the time, well, there was a semblance of peace, because at first the Germans didn't bother the people yet. But I know that, but I think I didn't know that. I found it later. The Jewish people in France and all over France, in Paris, there was an edict that they're supposed to go to their local commissariat of police office, and they have to register with their identity card. The foreigners, since they were not French citizens, they had to have identity card. So they had to go with their identity card to the commissariat and register, and they would put a stamp on it, Jew, Juif, J-U-I-F. And if you did not, you couldn't buy anything, because they gave you all the ration tickets to buy food, coal, whatever. If you didn't have those tickets, you might as well starve, because you couldn't buy anything. No business would sell you anything. So I knew that, but not at first when I was in Paris. Because when I came back from Paris and I went to school, and then I went after the camp, Colonie de Vacances, things were bad already in France. And at the time, one of my older sister, another sister, Regina Rivka, she just before the war started, she had married a man, André Deutsch, D-E-U-T-S-C-H. He had registered, he could join the French soldier under the lead of Pétain. So there were about, I don't know exactly, maybe 30,000 foreigners who joined what they called the French Foreign Legion. So he had joined. Among them, there were mostly foreigners, mostly Jews, who had left, Poland, Germany, all those countries where they had been in great danger. They had come to France because they thought they would be at peace. And now they joined to fight against the Nazis. So he was married, she married him, and soon after he was called into the French army. And I think he was sent to the south of France, somewhere near Perpignan, Barcarès, whatever, in the south of France. And eventually he was taken as a prisoner of war, and he was sent to Germany to work as like a free worker on a farm in Creusa, Kreuzat. So he was a prisoner of war. Now, my sister Regine eventually had found herself pregnant, and she had a baby, a little boy, Claude, Joseph, and he became sick. So when he was sick, the doctor advised her to take him to the country. And during the time of the exodus from Paris by the French people and everybody, she had some friends who in a certain part of France, Le Morvan, M-O-R-V-A-N, so she decided to go there and rented a little house in a little place called Jeusot, Jeusot. So she went there with her little boy. My mother took me to visit her, and she decided that it was good for me, since I was a sickly child all the time, with sore throats and whatever, that I should stay with her because the air of the country would be good for me. So she left me there with her. And so I was there with her. I went to school, which was about maybe 2 kilometers or what, over a mile or more to go to school, up and down the mountains. So I stayed there. That was, let's say, I was about 11 years old. And before I was 12, before that, one day, they called my mother, my sister Bert, with all the brother and sister, I get mixed up, my sister Regine, to go to the nearest city about 40 kilometers away or something like that. It's called Autun, A-U-T-U-N, to register at the prefecture of police. Apparently, she took me along. Apparently, all the Jews all over France, Paris and wherever, they had to go and report. And there I was given the Yellow Star. So I was given the Yellow Star, even though I was born in France. And we returned to Jeusot, and I was told I should sew it on a sweater and wear it all the time. Well, Jeusot was such a small little hamlet, not even part of the bigger burg. And one time, I remember I wore my sweater with that, and there was a small country fair. You know, all the Catholic, all the people went there to that small fair. And of course, I had my sweater with the star. The people there, they never knew what a Jew was. It was such remote places. So they kept looking at me, and I was so very, very shy and very, very self-conscious. I decided I'm never going to wear it again. I put the sweater away, and I didn't wear it even when I went to school. I never wore it. But one day, somehow my sister Regine thought she was safe because her husband was a prisoner of war. She was getting a small pension, and she was getting also a small pension from her husband's family business. In Paris, there were 5 brothers, and they had a small company making raincoats. They glued, you know. So she thought she was safe and she had a little pension. But eventually, they decided to send some gendarmes, the local gendarmes from the nearest burg, Roussillon, to arrest her. So they came and arrested her, but they left the little boy and me. And the only thing, I don't even remember myself saying it, but she says that I screamed at the gendarmes and called them assassins, you know, to assassinate. So, but I don't remember myself doing that, but they said this is what I did. I was very much against. So, but fortunately, there was a man, Monsieur Moreau, in the hamlet, who he was the only one who had a car. And once a month he used to take the people there and my sister to Autun to shop, or she would send a package to her husband who was a prisoner of war. So I think he worked in the resistance. I didn't know that. I found after the war. And he had contact at in Roussillon, the nearby burg, with the mayor. He had connection. So before she was transferred to where probably the Germans or higher things, they released her. He had connections. So she quickly came back, packed everything, and then we took the train to go to Paris. So we were in Paris only a couple days.
Just wanted to ask you when that was. Take your water.
Okay.
When did you go back to Paris?
It must have been beginning of 1942. I was not quite 12 years old, because my birthday is in August. So when I was in Paris, we stayed just a couple of days in the hotel, and she took me to the wife of the man, a French man, but a Jewish man, who was taking care of the business of the Dutch family. He was named the director, because at that time, although the French Jews, they were not afraid, because they did not, the French Jews were the last one that they would deport eventually. So he was working there, and he also joined the resistance. So this was his second wife, because he had come from a wealthy Blum family of several generations. And this was his second wife. Her name was Aimée, E-I-M-E-E, Aimée Blum. She was a nurse, a Catholic. She had been raised in a convent. So I stayed there a couple of days, and then my parents were not here anymore. I'll come back to that later. My parents had left Paris. That's why I was staying with her for a couple of days. And she took me to Normandy, to Couterne, Couterne, a small burg in Normandy, to an older French Catholic couple, Monsieur and Madame Clément Barbier. I don't know exactly how old they were. I figure maybe in their upper 70s, maybe. I don't, because we never really, I didn't know much about them. So that's where I went for the next couple of years. They sent me to public school. They sent me to church every Sunday. And they were very, very kind to me. I didn't know at the time that someone provided some money for my upkeep. I didn't know that. I was not told anything when I was taken by train by Amy Bloom. I was first of all, I was very shy, very naive, even for my age. So I didn't ask any question.
I would like you to elaborate on something that
Yes.
you were talking about. It sounded like foreign-born Jews were treated differently than French-born Jews. Can you talk about that
Yes.
a little bit?
Well, you know, I wrote the story of my family, but in it I mentioned, because I didn't know if you would be interested, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in France. And at the time, there was an organization called l'Action Française, which had also a sub thing called the Cagoulard, where they were in with, what's his name, Henri-Philippe Pétain. Now you have to know that l'Action Française under the Pope XI was stopped from exercising their anti-Semitism because it was an organization that was against everything, not just Jews, but they wanted a monarchy, they were against the Republic, they were what else, against the Masons, the Huguenots, the what do you call, the Huguenots, what's the Protestant, you know, they were against everything. So under the Pope XI, they were not allowed to practice. However, when Pope XII came, and I must say, he was a great sympathizer of Germany, Nazi, because at one time he studied there in Germany, he spoke fluently German, and when he came into power, he re-established l'Action Française, and they were a great power. They joined Henri-Philippe Pétain, the leader of Germany, who collaborated with Hitler, and his vice president, Pierre Laval. I'll have to come back to that because Philippe Pétain, I have to mention one thing though, that France was divided into two parts. The German, the Nazi occupied the west, north, south, west of France. And what's his name, Pétain, was in Vichy, which was supposedly the French Free France. But at his disposition, he had the milice. The milice was like the police, but let's say a paramilitary police organization who responded to him and to Pierre Laval. And they were the one who eventually arrested the people, the French who were in the resistance against the Nazi and also against the Jews. So which the part of Free France under Vichy eventually became like the part occupied by the Nazi, because eventually the Nazi also came there.
When you went to Normandy,
Yes.
how was your appearance, your presence explained? Who were you supposed to be? What was your cover story?
You know, it's very strange, but I don't remember that at all. I don't remember if they told me anything. Maybe, I don't know if I was told that I was probably not a grandchild, but someone from Paris. I really don't know. But I know one thing, is that they sent me to public school, where I suspect there were 1, 2, 3, at least 3 other girls which I suspected were Jewish from Paris. But the climate of fear was so great. I was not going to ask them if they were Jewish. They never asked me if I was Jewish. They stayed with other people. And the directress of the school, who was also my teacher, Mademoiselle Geneviève Pitois, she was single, and she was the directress of the school also. And a devout Catholic. And she kept 2 of the girls from Paris, whom I was sure were Jewish, but we never asked. And she protected them too.
Who knew you were Jewish?
Who knew who was Jewish?
Who knew you were Jewish?
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew your true identity as a Jewish child?
Monsieur, Madame Barbier, and probably the priest. And I don't know if they told some of their friends, because they used to play cards. They even taught me the game and asked me to play cards with them, the old one. But maybe they didn't. You know, I really don't know.
During the time you were there, did you have any encounters with the Germans? Did you have any close calls?
Yes. One time, the German officers were looking for houses for some of their officers. And Monsieur and Madame Barbier's house, I have a picture of their house on the main street. They came inside, and I remember that my back was turned to them. When they came, I was reading something and standing. And they inspected the houses to see if they could find rooms. Now, Madame Barbier's house was like a double house. And it looked very big, but they had arranged it in such way. My bed was on the landing of the steps, and they had one bedroom. They had an attic. They put all their apples there to dry. There was no room in that part where they could have a room. What, excuse me, what they didn't know is that above the cider, they had what they call a pressoir, where you make your own cider. Excuse me. Oh. So they used to have another small apartment there, but you could see it because it was in the pressoir. You had to go up steps. So he came and he saw me. I had red hair and blue eyes, but apparently he must have asked for my name because he hesitated but didn't say anything and he left. But after that, he sent probably a soldier to the school to check the students, their books, whatever. Excuse me. My throat. Do you mind if I go and get a candy?
Would you like, you want to take a break for a minute? Let's take a break.
Just for a minute, okay?
Okay,
Because
okay,
there's
let's
a-
wait.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, we're back. I hope you're feeling a little better. You were telling us about the Germans sent somebody to the school
Yes.
to check. Yeah, please continue.
So I didn't know about it. My teacher, Mademoiselle Geneviève Pitois, sent me, apparently she knew the Germans were coming, she sent me to watch the kindergarten children in another class. So I was there with the children, and all of a sudden the door opened up, and a soldier looked. He saw me, I guess, but I had red hair. I was not, the typical dark hair girl. He just opened the door, saw the small children, saw me, and he left. I was afraid, terribly afraid, but I didn't move, and I waited until the teacher came back and took me back to the classroom. I guess the Germans had left.
Were you given any guidance when either on your way to Normandy or after you got there? Any guidance to help you fit in as a Christian child? Did they teach you what to say or do or how to pray or anything like that?
I don't remember anything at all of that. I don't know. I guess I adjusted and I learned going to school and going to church every Sunday. We never talked about anything.
How long were you there?
I was there about 2.5 years. Now, I do remember D-Day, because D-Day, you had those planes, American plane, I guess. I forgot the name. I found on the computer after double tail, I think they call him Spitfire. I found out on the computer which plane it was. They came and bombed the railway because they had a small line direct to Paris. So they came and bombed the railway. otherwise, at that time, I don't remember anything else at first. Eventually, let's say that was on the 6th of June, we were liberated from Koutern by the American Army. And that was on August 13, 1944. Now, that day, I remember that, oh yeah, before that, it wasn't safe all the time to stay in the house, so they had sent me to the farmers with some other girls to sleep there. But it's very strange. I can't even remember where I slept, who. I can't remember anything about it. But I know that we were sleeping over the farmers. So, the day we were liberated, let's see. Before the day we were liberated, one morning, as we were walking back from the farmers to the house, there had been some bombing during the night. And I saw on the side of the road soldiers who were in the, in the bushes, were on the side of the road, and their trucks disabled, I guess. I didn't dare to look. I ran quickly to the house. When I got there, Monsieur and Madame Barbier, they found out that some Germans, they probably went to sleep somewhere else too, because they had, I forgot to mention before, Monsieur and Madame Barbier at another place in the back of the houses with sheep. They had a barn and they had sheep. And across, further a little bit down, they had an orchard of apple trees, where they made their own cider all year. So they must have gone to sleep in their barn. They found out that the German broke the glass through the back, the garden, and they stole all her jellies. Madame Barbier was a very good cook. She made all her jellies and pâtés, pork, whatever. They had stolen everything. So, but, this, they say, okay, that's the worst it should be. But the day that we were liberated, that was a little frightening too, because we could hear the cannon, the noise of the cannon. I guess the Americans were coming closer. And there was also, Monsieur and Madame Barbier decided to take a little suitcase. We carried some suitcase to their field in the back of where they had the sheep. And while we were running, we saw, it's very scary, we saw bombs. It comes as a whistle, a big whistle, and you could see the bomb going forward. Fortunately, not on us, but forward. And we crouched on the retreat. We were so frightened. And then we ran in the back, between the fields. There was a small path leading to where the farmers are, between the fields. And then we were crouched there, sitting there, Monsieur, Madame Barbier and me. All of a sudden, there is a cart with horses and two German soldiers going through that little park, trying, I guess, to escape. And they ask a question which the man, Monsieur Barbier, didn't answer. And they looked at me. I was already 14 years old, but somehow, luckily, they decided to go. And we, in turn, we ran the other way to the farmers. And there, after the night, we were liberated by the American army. And what I remember at the time was that the trucks with the American soldiers passed in front of the house because they were on the main street, Monsieur and Madame Barbier. And we stood there with jugs of cider to give them to drink. And the Americans were so generous. They would throw their cigarettes and chocolate and everything. And I saved everything in bags to give eventually to my brothers, which I didn't know what happened to them. I didn't know at all. But I know, if you don't mind, if I tell what happened to my family, because they were in terrible and very great danger, and I didn't find out until after the war, until I was able to talk to my mother and father and my brothers and sisters. And my mother, she wrote a small thing in Hungarian from a stay in Limoges. I'll come back to that after, which I had translated by a man of our synagogue, Hungarian, and which I later edited and incorporated into my story, which I wrote, which is called The Court of Miracles. So
we'll get to your book in a minute. Before you tell me about
Yes.
what happened to your family members, which I will definitely want to talk to you about.
So I didn't know what happened to my family. And what happened is that at that time, all the Jewish people were being arrested. I don't know if you or the students, future generation, will ever hear about the Veldiv. The Veldiv, it's a very important thing. It was a place, it was what they called the Velodrome d'Hiver, which was where they have the sports and arena. And there they arrested, they were under order by the Germans. They told the police, the French police, they were guilty to arrest the Jews. And they had an order to arrest about 27,000 Jews. So they went all over the suburb, the hospitals, the metro, the subway, wherever they could to arrest the Jews. So they arrested about 13,000 Jews, and they put them there in the Veldiv for almost a week. No amenities, no food, no drink. I think there was somebody made a movie about the Veldiv. Maybe they could find out about that. But the point is some older people who were, on top, all the way on the seats, on the top of the Velodrome d'Hiver, of the arena. They knew what's going to happen. They prefer to commit suicide. They would throw themselves from up and commit suicide. Once you were there, you could get out. So at that time, there was a family living on the same floor as my parents. The only one, before I come to that, maybe, all those outfits, tell you about that in the Veldiv, and then I'll go back, okay? My sister, Berthe, there was a family, a woman with her 3 or 4 children, Madame Doskel. I have her name in the books, you know, the list. She was arrested. The police came, and my sister Berthe, who was at the time 14 years old, asked them where they're going to be transferred. And they said to the Veldiv. So one boy, Jaco, I remember Jaco, I don't remember the others, ran away from the police. And he and my sister Berthe went to the courtyard where there were a lot of places to hide. So the mother and the 3 children were taken to the Veldiv. My sister Berthe said to my parents, I would like to go and bring, she was smart for her age, much more than I was. I want to go to the Veldiv and bring me Madame Doskel, maybe some bread and milk. So she went, very innocent. She came to the Veldiv. Of course, there were guards there. And the guards were mean. And they laughed at her. They were very mean. And they said, they didn't let her in. It's a good thing, otherwise she would have been deported too. So they said, there is nothing to see. So Berthe left, and when she came home, she was so traumatized. She hid under the dining room table, and she said to my mother and father, we cannot stay here. They came today, but tomorrow maybe we'll be on the list. So my parents didn't know what to do. But eventually, they remember that Nicolas Deutsch, the oldest brother of their son-in-law, André Deutsch, had asked them, why do you stay in Paris? He had moved with his wife and his children, and his wife was pregnant, to a big property in France, where eventually his wife was deported too, but not him. But so he said to my parents, why don't you go and see the director, Maurice Blum, and I'll tell him to help you. So they went to the office. Maurice Blum provided probably money, I don't know, and a guide to take the train and take them to Limoges, which was part of Free France at the time. At the time, there were no Germans yet. So they had to stop and transfer train at Angoulême, go to Limoges. But in Angoulême, or before they got to Limoges, they stopped somewhere, maybe it was Angoulême, and the guide said he took them, I don't know if it was by car or what, to another place in a village to have some drinks in a cafe. And they didn't notice that there were some Germans outside, because they were watching. It had been told them that sometimes a guide would come and bring juice. So the waitress came, and they ordered some drinks, and the waitress said to them, if your papers are in order, fine, but if not, you better leave because the Germans are there. So my brother Armand, who was maybe 20, followed the man, the guide in the bathroom, and the guide said, oh, you'll probably be arrested, I work for nothing. I guess for him, the money was important. So he said to him, go to the back door, go into the yard and hide somewhere behind in the bushes. So my mother and my brother Armand went there. I don't know how many bushes or trees there were. They hid there. But they heard steps, heavy boots coming outside. And they were traumatized. They didn't budge. They could hardly breathe. And my brother said we should have stayed in Paris. But my mother, being religious, said, don't worry, God is with us. So they did move, and fortunately, the German went back. But my mother and brother were so traumatized, they didn't budge. They were trembling, and eventually, a long time after the German had left, the man came back, and he took them, told them we'll travel during the night. You know what, at that point, I don't remember if it was Goulême or going to Limoges. Sorry. But anyway, during the night, they stayed near a river, and eventually, early in the morning, he started to walk. And he told my mother and my brother to stay behind. And he would signal to them when to go. So they did walk for a couple of hours. And there, the guide looked, it was like a forest. And he told them, now you're on your own. This is the border. There are no Germans, only French people. So you could go ahead. And he left. So Armand and my mother went. They showed their papers. My mother didn't want to talk because they would see he's a foreigner. She has an accent. And my brother handled everything. And they arrived in Limoges. Limoges was a big city. They stayed in a hotel. They could stay in the same hotel every night because it was too dangerous. The milice, the police, was always looking. So they changed hotels, but fortunately, my brother met a friend from Paris, Manuel Levy, and his mother lived there with her other children in an apartment. And she said she would like to meet my mother. So my mother met her, and she, through Madame Levy, they were able to find a room in a man's house, Monsieur Gentil. They gave him money. As they said, they would pay him so much a month. They would pay for cigarettes, food, drinks, because he seemed like he loved to drink. And finally, he decided, okay, so they gave him money to buy a bed, and they stayed in Monsieur Gentil for a while, but not all the time. Monsieur Gentil suspected, they didn't tell Monsieur Gentil that they were Jewish. They said that they were refugees from the north of France. Their house had been bombed. Okay. The man eventually became suspicious. He used to go to the bars, and my father would eat pork, okay? So when he talked to people there, they say, oh, they must be Jews. So one day he came, and he says, you must be Jewish. And my mother laughed, and she said, of course not. She said, we're refugees from the north. My husband has a very bad stomach. He cannot eat pork. So for a couple of days went, but then my mother and father didn't feel safe anymore. And they decided to move about 100 kilometers to Lussac-le-Château, which is a very important place of fighting too. But before that, I have to say, my father and my other brother Ludo stayed in Paris waiting for their turn to be able to go to Limoges. And they moved from their small apartment to a room in another building. And somebody reported them. The German would give 500 francs to any French who would report a Jew. And apparently, among all the poor people in the courtyard, and there were a lot, somebody sold them out. So one early morning, the police came and knocked at the door. And my brother Ludo was frightened. He was practically dizzy. My father showed him not to talk. And they stayed, they could see that they had a flashlight under the door. And they left. But a French friend, I think an Italian, I think her name, they went to school together, Sartori, I think, came to the door, and they knew Ludo, and she said, you cannot stay because they went to get a warrant to break the door. They know you're there, and they'll come and arrest you. So Ludo and my father quickly left the room, and they went to a neighbor upstairs. The neighbor says, sorry, I cannot help you because they're going to go through all the apartment, and we would be in trouble. So just as the police was coming back, there was on the stairway in a place, there was a window, a big window leading to a roof. And that roof, if you went down, you could go in the alley. There was an alley called, my mind gets blank all of a sudden, but it comes back to me. And my brother and my father opened the window quickly, shut it. They went on the roof, and there was, the spots for the water that goes all the way. He helped my father. They slid along the water spot all the way until the alley. There was glass on the floor. And there they were barefoot, and they ran to the two stores that they knew, the wine store and the one for the coal, I think. And they went there and borrowed slippers. They took the subway, not shaven, nothing, and they went to the office, Maurice Bloom, to help them send someone to their old apartment to get clothes, whatever they needed, and he was going to provide also a guide for them. But the guide didn't want to do it anymore. He had too many problems. He didn't want to. So Maurice Bloom gave them false papers. But it was dangerous too because they were not exact. There may be some ink spots or whatever. So they did manage to go and get to Limoges. And they were happy to see my mother. Unfortunately, again they had trouble. My brother Armand had left, took the train to La Roquebrune, someplace where there was some construction. And he couldn't find to be hired work or a place for them to live. He decided to come back. But when at the train station in Brive, B-R-I-V-E, he was arrested. The police saw this tall, blonde man. They suspected, or he's a German deserter, maybe he's a Jew. They took him to the police station. They discovered his false papers. They discovered his original papers, and took him to court. And they decided, for crossing illegally the frontier, you know, they'll put him 3 months in jail. And after 3 months, they'll send him to a concentration camp. My mother and father and Ludo, they didn't know what happened to him. They sent Ludo to Brive. There, he asked questions at the hotel, and they said, yes, there was a young man by the name of Dratler, but he couldn't find a place, and he went back. They sought to Limoges.
I'm sorry, Esther, this is where and Solange, I have to stop and change to the next media card.
Do you think
Okay.
it's too long? Is it too long?
No, no, no. We just
No,
have
no,
to-
no, we just have to, let's,
And in 3, 2, 1.
okay, we're back now. Would you please continue what you were
Okay.
saying?
Well, my parents didn't know what happened to my brother, and they were very, very worried. Eventually, he sent a letter to a neighbor, and they found out that he was in jail. While he was in jail, he developed a disease, la gale, okay. It's a contagious disease on his hand. And they sent him to a hospital across the street, run by the sisters, the nuns. So, at the time, they took off his clothes, everything, and when they would come back after a while to pick him up at the hospital, but the sisters said, no, he's very contagious. So they were very afraid to get the disease, so they left him there. And he was able to stay there. But at the time, there was Le Maquis, the Resistance, and they killed many Nazis from the Wehrmacht in Tulle, which Tulle was the city where my brother was at the hospital across from Tulle. So sometimes the word comes to me in French, it's very, in reprisal, the Nazi sent the Wehrmacht, they sent the Nazi to the Wehrmacht to help them. and they took about close to 100 men, not Jewish, young, everything. They hanged them on butcher block to show the Maquis de Resistance what happens in reprisal to their action. Okay? So, at the time, there were just a couple men that had escaped and came to the hospital, and the Germans were after them. And my brother was in the hospital, and he was in the kitchen and doing things for cooking, and the Germans opened the door. They saw him, but they already got the couple men, so they left. So at that point, my brother Armand told the sisters he doesn't want to stay there anymore. He's going to go and join La Résistance, the Maquis, le Maquisard. So he left. I don't know why he got there, through the farms or the woods or whatever, but I know one thing, he did join le Maquis. And my other brother, who at the time had false papers and was working in a restaurant, he was making a lot of money, he was helping my parents. Since he had false papers, as a French citizen, they were taken, the Frenchmen, to Germany as workers, and they were paying them. So they came to arrest him in the restaurant, but the man said he doesn't know where he is, he left. And a woman who worked there helped, she took him to his apartment, and he stayed there for a while. Right? At the time when my brother joined the Maquis, Ludo also joined the Maquis. And it is important because when he was in the Maquis, there was a place which is well known. It is in complete ruin in France, Oradour-sur-Glane. And this was a village where maybe 640 people were there, and the Germans, thinking that they were with the Maquis, they killed all the people. The women in the church by mitraillette, the men in a barn, they were all killed. Maybe one or two the most survived. So Oradour-sur-Glane in the France, because the Wehrmacht went on its way to go to Normandy, they killed in reprisal all the people in that village. And it remains the ruins. They never rebuilt it. It's still there. The reason I mention it because my brother Ludo, who was in the Maquis de Resistance, one of the boys, a Jewish boy who was with him in the Resistance, had a sister who was in Oradour-sur-Glane, hiding with a family, and she was burned to death under a bed where all the people were killed. So when he went to Oradour with his fellow, the fellow looked for his sister, found only the remnants of his sister, and buried it in the soil. And eventually, after at liberation, they came back and they took all the remnants and traveled to Limoges, where officially they had a ceremony for the dead. So this is why I mentioned Radu.
Can we take a moment
Yes.
and have you introduce your brothers and sisters and who was where?
You couldn't do the phone.
Yeah, Kara, could you,
Unplug. Just take it off the phone.
you want to kill the phone if you can,
Take it off.
Is there a wire in the back?
Take it
to pull?
off. Don't answer. So, yes, I'll tell you want the names of my brothers and sisters. Okay.
And who was where?
Okay.
And let's wait a moment because I think Kara's coming back with some more water.
Yeah, we're
Thank
not
you.
recording, I hope.
No, we were because I didn't know what was going on. With
You
the phone.
wanted to know the names of my brothers?
Yeah, one minute. Is it possible for Kara to not walk across the camera shot if she has to get more water?
She would have to sit there.
I could sit on.
Yeah, let's do that.
You could sit
Yeah.
over.
You guys ready?
Yes.
And 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we're back. Sorry for that interruption. Can you please introduce your siblings, your brothers and sisters, and who was where?
Okay. My sister Yolande was born in Siget. She was born, or you want the date? No. Not
No,
when
I
she
just
was
want
born.
the names and where they were.
Okay. When she was in France, she married a Gentile, so she did not report herself as a Jew. Okay. Now, my sister Regine was 2 years younger, and she's the one I talk about, whose husband was a prisoner of war. She was in what you call Jeuzeau, and then other places as well. And then she even came to Limoges also. She was in Limoges and went on to Avignon, somewhere else. But we didn't talk about her, you know. Then there is my brother Armand. My brother Armand was the one who was with my mother who crossed the border to go to Limoges. And then he was arrested, he was in jail, and then he was in with the sisters in the hospital, and then he joined the maquisards, okay? And then there is my other brother, Ludo, who escaped from the apartment in Paris. And he was in Limoges, he worked, and eventually he joined Le Maquis also. My throat gets itchy.
Take your time.
Okay.
And was that everybody, or was there one more sister?
Well, my sister Berthe was born in Paris like me. She's a year older than I am. We're the two last living children of the family. She's 94, was 94 in July. She probably called me. She calls me every day from Paris. And I am now going to be 93 in a couple of days. And we were born in Paris. She was also, by the way, I forgot to tell you, in Limoges. She did come to Limoges eventually and stayed with one sister. Well, I don't want to go into too many details, okay? But the thing is that when my parents, I have to go back to that, when my parents left Limoges to go to Lussac-le-Château, my father used to travel back and forth to Limoges. He needed money, and since he sort of, he had several trades, not just varnishing furniture, which he couldn't do, but fix shoes. So he met a woman at the flea market, and he took shoes from her, and he fixed them and brought them back to Limoges so he could get money. Now, one day, when leaving Limoges with my brother Ludo and my sister Berthe, he was arrested at the station in Limoges. They were controlling their papers, and on the paper it said that my father is mute. So when they give him back the paper, my father, a very polite man, said merci. They arrested him on the spot, and they put him, I guess, what it was, a small concentration camp there, I don't know where exactly, outside of Limoges. So my sister Berthe and my brother saw him being arrested, but they didn't say anything because they could have been arrested too. They had different papers. So my sisters, they found out a woman who could take them, I don't know, to the milice, whatever it was, with the police, find out where he was. And they told her where he was. So she was able to bring him. Sometimes there was a man there who was fixing the shoes. And my father told the man, I'll fix the shoes for nothing. Just say that you need me. That's how he survived a little bit. And it was in the last 2 or 3 months of the war where the Nazis didn't have anymore enough trains to deport them to whatever many camps that they have. So, but my mother stayed at a farmhouse by herself, and nobody told her that my father had been arrested. And the lady said to her, you know, people, my neighbors, think you're a spy because you speak with an accent. And they said, you should go to the commissariat and report and come back showing a paper that you were allowed to stay. So my mother was very afraid, but she went. She didn't go to the commissariat. She walked around and around, and finally she came back and she said, you know, I went to the commissariat and they said I have every right to be here. So the lady said, okay, I'll tell the neighbors. But the German were, although the German went through, this time there were some German, and they were fighting against Le Maquis, not far away in the forest. So that day, a certain day, the German came, and they started to fight with the what you call the Maquis, and there was a lot of fire back and forth and everything. And the lady told my mother, we cannot stay in the house because the goes all over and hit the houses. We have to leave. So They ran away from the house to a side street. They stayed over somebody's house. And when the fight was over, she came back. But when she came back and went to get some water a pail of water, there were at least 20, 25 German soldiers right there. And they spoke to her. My mother understood German. She pretended she did not understand. She went like this. So one soldier said to the others, look, leave her alone, she's a dummy. The only thing she knows is this. So they left her. And they fought some more. But another time, they came back, and again, they wanted she should go into the barn. But she was busy in the kitchen, and thank God for her, they left. So the fight went on and on between the Germans and what you call the Maquis. But my mother needed some money, and she had made an agreement with another farmer to fix the bags, you know, the bags where they stored everything, and the man would pay her 5 francs for a bag. But he saw she was working fast. He reduced the price to 4 francs. Then he reduced the price for 2 francs. She had to work so fast just to be able to survive and to make money. But after when Limoges was liberated eventually, my father and my brother Ludo and Berthe, my sister Berthe, came, pick up my mother, and they went back to Limoges. And one time my brother Armand, the one who was also in the Maquis, his train stopped by. So he stopped to see my parents. He had not seen them in 2 years. And after that, they went back to Paris. It was liberation.
What was your family reunion like when you all got together?
I didn't go back right away because the trains were not in operation after all the bombing. So my father sent my oldest brother Armand the train went to Alençon, 40 kilometers away. He had to find his way to come to find out if I'm alive, because they knew that Normandy had been bombed and everything. So he found me in good health. He went back to Paris, and then my father came to pick me up at the end of 1944. And we took the train, and I went back to Paris, and that's where I saw all the family, my parents. Yiddish, of course, to me, had become blocked, you know, because after all, I had lived so many years away from Paris with my family. First in Le Glandier, then Jeuzeau, then Couterne, and finally Paris. So the Yiddish and everything, I just didn't know, but I felt free. I felt happy to be reunited with my family, even though if it was in a poor apartment. The thing is said that, especially after the war, everybody was poor. My father had to work again. But I must say that my mother and my father before the worked very hard, both of them. And we ate very well, we were dressed well, we enjoyed life. And if it wouldn't be for the war, all the children would have had a trade. They would have been able to work. This is what my father thought. They would be able to work, make a living for them, and life would go on. But with the war, it was just horrible. So they had to start from scratch again. And then they found out about my cousins, my grandfather from Siget was deported. My cousins from in France were deported. They were the nieces and their children from my father from Siget. So after the war, my parents went and found out where they lived. And then, after the war, they, well, I get a blank here. It was a bad period, a very bad period for all of them and for all the Jewish people those who survived. And they came to Paris, and they were in transition. Many of them were looking to go 1948, the independence of Israel. So they went to Israel, which was a wonderful thing. And South America, they went all over where they could maybe have family or start a life again. Many came to the United States. My brother would have liked to come to the United States, but they were not allowed under the government of Roosevelt, and I don't have good things to say about him. They were unable because it was on quota. I must say, there is a man, a Jewish, David Hartman. I read his book. He wrote the Roosevelt, maybe, and I forgot the title of the book, but it is about, the United States and the Jews. And he wrote a very, very good book where he talks also about the government and the State Department. They were all against helping, bringing the Jews, maybe 5,000. Well, they brought 50,000 Syrian. And also, they didn't allow the bombs to bomb the camps. They needed the bombs for the war. They didn't need the bombs to save the Jews. I know I sound critical, but this is one thing that I feel, okay? Because the blame is put all over.
After the war, were you able to continue your education?
Well, when I came back to Paris, I couldn't continue when I was in Normandy, I passed the certificat d'études primaires, which is, usually you pass it at the age of 14, but I was 13. But the thing is, I couldn't go into higher studies because at the curriculum in France is that if you want to go to higher studies, you have to take certain courses at the age of 12. And I couldn't take those courses because nobody, signed up for me. So I went to what they say les cours Pigier to learn to be stenodactylograph, where I eventually worked after for a Swiss company, Les Produits Sans Dose, from Bâle, from Switzerland. They had their succursale, I don't know why, in French. I confuse with French and English. Their other business in Paris. So I worked for them. Let's say I was just 16 when I started, until 16, I guess. No, 16, I worked for somebody else first. No use to go into the details. And eventually, I got the job at Les Produits Sans Dose. And there I worked for a couple of years. And I left when I got married, in order to get married. I have to say something about my husband. My husband was a Holocaust survivor. Do you want me to say? Okay, I'll make it short. My husband's father and my mother's were first cousins. Czechoslovakia, he was from Bedevla, which is right over the frontier of Seagate. During the war, he was deported with his mother, 2 sisters, and the children to Matyserka ghetto, I don't know how long, in Hungary, and then he was deported to Auschwitz. Auschwitz, only a couple days. Then, I think his mother and sisters were in the gas chamber. They disappeared. He was sent, after a couple days, to the Warsaw Ghetto. That was in May 1944. Now, the ghetto, had been demolished after the great insurrection, a courageous insurrection of the Jewish people in in Warsaw. So it had been liquidated. All the people had been deported in many camps, which I'm not going to go into. And so he went, they sent him with other men to clean the bricks. I guess they must have had bricks left over from the demolition of the ghetto, and he went there to clean the bricks. Then they sent him back, almost like a death march, where it was raining, he didn't even know he was in the rain, and then he arrived to Dachau, and Dachau, he said he was sent to Kaufering. It's a annex of Dachau, not far from there, Landsberg Kaufering. So he was there from, I guess, May, June 1944 sometimes, until liberation on the, January 29, 1945. Then he came back home, where he only had one brother left. Eventually, instead of going to Israel, eventually he was able to come to the United States, where he had still 2 uncles. I'm not going to give their name, it's too long, who were in business here in Pittsburgh. So he came to Pittsburgh, and eventually he, what do you call, he enlisted during the Korean War into the American Army. But instead, I was in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, for training. Then he was sent back to Germany instead of Korea because he spoke many languages. And he was there in Regensburg in the, what they call, intelligence army. I don't know what he did there, probably interviewed people. On his furlough, he came to Paris, where he still had a sister, and he met me through his sister, and he decided he wanted to marry me. So we corresponded, and since it was he was going to be discharged, we could get married officially with, the paperwork. So we were married by a rabbi, by the immediate family in my sister Regine's apartment. Eventually, he was able to bring me to the United States in September 1952 by the ship Caronia, and he was somebody. I took somebody in New York family, put me eventually in the train to Pittsburgh, and they picked me up, his family, and then I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks later, I don't know how long, he was discharged by the army. How do you say discharged? Well, can't find the word. It's in his papers.
An honorable discharge?
Honorably discharged. See, sometimes I can't find the word. It's very frustrating. So he was honorably discharged, and he came to Pittsburgh, and we got married again by a justice of the peace. Okay? In October 1952.
Before we pick up the story in the United States,
Yes,
I wanted to ask you two questions.
yes.
Did you witness or experience any anti-Semitism in France after the war?
I'm trying to think. No, I don't think. At the time, I think it was like the French and everybody, it was, let's put it that way, euphoria. It was such euphoria to be liberated from the Nazi. We just couldn't believe it. And at the time, the governments, they were not steady. It was constantly one government falling and another government, taking over. So I don't think at the time, after the war, I experienced anti-Semitism. However, I must say that during the war, even though it was, lots of what you call French people, who were with, what's his name, Pétain and everything, who were against the Jews, and also the church, big church from the Pope, the influence, everything. There were a lot of the French people were showing their what you call sympathy to the Jews. They wore yellow ribbon, they wore even stars yellow, everything yellow to mock the Nazi and to show their sympathy to the Jews. So not all French people were anti-Semitic, even though maybe the government at the time and the others were, okay?
You were in Europe still during the Nuremberg trials. Were you able to follow the Nuremberg trials at all?
You know, I'm trying to think. I saw the Nuremberg trial, but I couldn't remember if I saw it in France or in the United States. I must have seen. But where would I see it? We didn't have TV there. I don't know where I saw it. Or maybe I saw it only when I came to the United States. Because we didn't have TV there. We only had the radio. So I cannot see where would I see the Nuremberg trial in Paris.
Did they have newsreels in the cinema?
Yes. Yes. Maybe. But then you can't really follow the whole Nuremberg trial on that too. I think I probably became more aware of the Nuremberg trial over the years here in the United States, probably.
One last look back. Is there anything else you want to share about your life in France before we continue your story in the United States?
Well, is that where I say in conclusion or what? Or just...
Oh, no, we're not finished yet.
Oh, okay.
I just want to make sure there's nothing else that you wanted to tell us about your time in France before we now turn our attention to the United States.
No. What I did discover, but that was here in the United States, is that the company Sandoz, for whom I worked, were helping actually the Nazi. I didn't find this out until years later on my computer, because you see, Les Produits Sandoz were disbanded. They were disbanded because, you know, from Switzerland, even though it was supposed to be a neutral country, they were not neutral. They provided material, lots of other things that I can't find the words now, to Nazi Germany, so that after the war, they disbanded. They didn't want to be maybe sued, I don't know, so they disbanded. So that's the only thing. I know the directors of that organization, I remember his name, was a Swiss. You know, he was from Switzerland, and some of the other people too.
Let's turn our attention now to the United States. What were your expectations of America, and what were your first impressions?
Well, when I arrived in New York, I was wondering if the family would come and pick me up. Larry's uncle, his wife, or his daughter, they came to pick me up. They were wonderful to me. I stayed with them a couple of days. They cooked and everything, and they put me in the train to go to Pittsburgh. Of course, at the time, let's see, since I had married Larry in Paris, I was already pregnant, and I didn't know it at the time. So when I came, from July I was married, to September when I came, I was already pregnant. So when I came, I was a bit dizzy from the ship, you know, and they put me in the train. I was very shy, even though I was a married woman, very, very shy. I didn't talk to the man who was sitting across. I mean, I was extremely shy, okay? So that I could not converse. I knew English, because I had taken private lesson. Bert, my sister Bert and me, after work, we used to go for private English lesson. But still, I didn't speak well. So that was in the train. Then I came to Pittsburgh. I stayed with Larry's uncle and aunt until Larry was furloughed. And then he got a small apartment and we moved in. And my daughter, Michelle, was born in 1953. I came in 1952. She was born in April 53. And my son was born 8 years later, in 1961. And I have 5 granddaughters. 4 of them, I'm showing off, are doctors. The oldest one is business, and I have the one business is the only one so far who is married. She has 3 little girls, so I'm a great grandmother 3 times.
What did you tell your children about your childhood?
You know, at first, nobody talked about the Holocaust. Nobody wanted to know about the Holocaust. I even wrote some poems, one is called Etiquette and one En Vogue, where people thought it was bad taste to talk about the Holocaust. Nobody wanted to talk about the Holocaust. The United States was helping Germany to recover because they were again, what you call the Cold War with Russia. So they even helped Germans, Nazi, to come to the United States. So they certainly were not interested in talking about the Holocaust. So this is what it is. It took many, many years for the Holocaust to be talked about it and for the claims conference to start what you call getting restitution for the Jews. So at first, everybody kept quiet, okay? And also, maybe they didn't want to awaken painful memories in the Holocaust survivors. I don't know.
Do you speak publicly about your experiences now?
Well,
or have you
did speak,
recently?
I did speak to 2 years in a row for a French class from outside of Pittsburgh in a suburb. And the teacher brought the children to Pittsburgh, and I spoke to them, showed them some of the books, different things. After that, I think I got sick when I was in Florida, and I didn't speak anymore. But I gave, over the years, a couple of interviews. I think 2 interviews I gave to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. 1 interview I gave to an artist, a Spanish artist who was painting pictures of many Holocaust survivors. He painted my picture too, and his sister, no. Yeah, yes. Was it his wife or his sister? She is a professor at Dartmouth College. So they were both in Pittsburgh for the project that he had uh, painting many Holocaust survivors, and at the same time he interviewed them. So he interviewed me, and I don't know how one day I found that my interview with him was in University of Minneapolis. I don't know how I got there. I have no idea. But maybe he was promoting his work maybe throughout the United States. Could be. Oh, and one more. About 2-3 years ago, I gave an interview to Seton Hill University in Greensburg, PA, which is about an hour from here. It's a Catholic university, and every year they would have a ceremony from Kristallnacht, very well done, very sensitive to the Jewish people, and they would invite Jewish survivors. We used to go, quite a few of them. They would provide transportation. They would treat us very well, and then they would separate them in different rooms and talk separately to a couple students. But since now many of the Holocaust survivors died, you know, I don't think they could have Kristallnacht, but they did invite me this past year. They were showing up my video. They sent me the video, but I don't know where it is. They showed the video they had a showing of my video, and they invited me to come there to see, you know, the video and meet the people. It was very well done.
You've done some writing about the Holocaust. Poetry, a book. Can you share with us some of your work?
I could read you 2 poems that are not too long, okay?
Yeah, let's save those for after the narrative. But can you just share with us now?
All right, I'll tell you.
What possessed you, and then no, please stay seated for just a minute. We'll get to the poems and you can read them in just a minute. But just tell us, what made you start writing poetry? What made you start writing your book?
First of all, I did write a small book of poetry, which was published by Amazon. The only thing is, I let it go because some of my best poems relating to the Holocaust were not included, and that bothered me. So eventually, I want it to be again republished in chronological order and with a lot more poem. Now, I wrote poetry. I think when I was young, I did write a couple of poems in French, and maybe this is why. But the thing is that it's more than an outrage. I mean, the little book of that book, it says outrage and hope. But I would say that it's more than outrage. I did write it, I felt, but I would have to read it because I don't know the couple of sentences. If you want, I could read you how
We'll get to it in just a minute.
Okay.
I'll have I'm going to ask you to share 1 or 2 of your poems in just a minute. But let's do that at the very end. Okay. And before we get to that, I want to ask you about some things that are happening in the world today and your reaction, given your personal history. What is it like for you when you see refugees coming out of Ukraine?
Well, sure, I'm sorry for them, but I'll tell you what really stunned, I would say stunned me, when there was a Tree of Life, massacre. I knew one of the survivors who almost got killed, Judah. He died now recently. But the point is, everybody was sure, it's in Pittsburgh and it's very close to you. Something like this happens. I figure, why not? I didn't feel anything. And I figured to myself, what's wrong with me? I don't feel anything. But the point is, and I want to elaborate on that if you don't mind, this is one more of the massacres of the Jewish people. If you know a little bit, I'm not going to go deep into the Jewish history, you have the Egyptian, the Greeks, the Abyssinian, the Babylonian, the Romans, some of the Muslims, the Christian with the Crusade, the can I find the word? Where's from Spain? There is
the Inquisition and the expulsion.
That's what I'm looking for. The Inquisition, and also the church at the time with the popes. There were some good popes, lots of bad popes. I saw their history. And they were responsible for the Inquisition because you have millions Catholic people who look toward the Pope. So then after that, you had the pogrom from Russia. You have other terrors, the White Terror, other terrors. Finally, everything leading to the Holocaust. So I said that the seeds of the Holocaust were planted throughout the century into the minds of the people, leading to the Holocaust. And this, I want the future generations to know, because they don't know anything about the history, and they're young, they're busy, they don't have time to go and investigate and check everything. But if they truly are interested, they would learn a little bit of the Jewish history. Okay?
I know you wanted to share some of your poetry, which maybe somebody can hand you so you can remain seated.
Well,
and you also have a conclusion you wanted to share with us.
Let me see. So this is in conclusion. Okay.
So are you going to read one of your poems to us now?
Yes. Now, wait a minute. There was something else. No. Wait a minute.
We're still recording,
no,
Esther.
Could you hand me this book? The book. Yeah. No. The book where I have the poetry. Okay, maybe I could get up and get it.
Is that it?
Yeah, this one. No. Excuse me, but I have to go.
Let her help you with the wire. I'm going to cut.
What?
Yeah.
And,
wait till we're ready.
Okay.
We are recording.
But I wrote the question you asked before. I wrote my poetry as deep feelings became concrete into words, although as a hidden child, separated from my family for a few years during World War II, was spared the horror of deportation and suffering of the Jewish victims, the realization of the monstrous acts of barbarity inflicted on an innocent, singled-out population fills one with pain and rebellion. This is, I couldn't answer your question because my mind is not working well at this point. Now I'll read you the two poems. Okay. It was written in 1996. Go with your mother. Innocent words carrying a macabre meaning.
I'm going to stop you, I'm sorry. Can you hold the paper a little? You're brushing the microphone, so that little thing on your chest. So, yeah, there you go.
Closer to the microphone?
No, don't touch it. Don't touch it with the paper.
Oh, okay. But I can't. Okay. I'll start again, okay? Go with your mother. Innocent words carrying a macabre meaning, words of doom, knowingly and coldly deceiving, cutting off the life of the child, throwing him in the burning oven. Go with your mother. Words intended for security, twisted to his annihilation. Go with your mother. Words expressing the treachery, the inhuman cruelty of the tyrant, snuffing the breath of the child, condemning to die at the threshold of a soaring life. With these words, go with your mother. The murderer extinguished hope and his own humanity. Now, the next one, it's not too long. This one was written, can see good, in the 2000 years. It's called Unwanted. There was a time when the plight of the refugees and those Jews who miraculously survived the atrocities of the infamous Nazi regime during the Holocaust, the final solution did not affect the conscience of nations, did not exact their compassion, but drew a blank refusal to offer asylum and repatriation. The world closed its eyes and ears to the fate of the Jews. The world, still shameful, devoid of human concerns, closed its doors to the unwanted. However, the Jews, undaunted, having experienced the stench of cremation, having survived annihilation, inspired by their predecessor, fought to the death for their right to their nation, implacably defying the prejudices and hostility of a world full of corruption. That their existence seems to prick, they ultimately succeeded by force and persuasion, by diligence and intelligence, to change their status of unwanted to the legitimate access au Brotherhood.
I have one last question for you.
Yes.
What message do you have for future viewers of this interview?
Well, I would like to talk directly to the future generation. My concern, it's not so much my story, and of course the story of my family, because they have an idea of what it was to survive while not being in the camps. I'm sure they learned already about the camps. So in conclusion, what I want to say, because I might not find the right words, I want to read what I wanted to say. In conclusion, I would like to address you, the future generation. You may have heard about the Holocaust, most likely about the revision of historical facts left to debate, meant to preserve the status quo, political power of soi-disant democracies. This is why it is important that you should know about the causes of the Holocaust, the history of the European country, and others that promoted hatred of the Jews, of Judaism, expulsion and recall of the Jews, the church responsibility in the Inquisition and criminal action. The seeds of anti-Semitism were planted throughout the centuries, leading to the annihilation of over 6 million Jews, 1.5 million children, and many others non-Jews. So beware of totalitarianism. Do not be complacent to prevent the repetition of such atrocities. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
You know, I must say, I'm not going to get up because I saw how shaky I am whenever it's about the Holocaust. I can't help it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna cut Esther.
Yeah.
So Solange, tell me who these people are, and after you say their name from left to right, if you could spell it, please, and tell me who they are.
My father, Isaac Dratler, E-I-Z-I-K or C-K. My mother, Rosa Dratler, D-R-A-T-L-E-R. I don't know if I should give their names, what you call, her maiden name. Davidovici,
Sure.
Ershkovitz.
Okay, and go ahead, please. State your name.
Oh, my name is Solange Lebovitz. S-O-L-A-N-G-E, Lebovitz, L-E-B-O-V-I-T-Z.
Okay, and say the person on the left is? If you could tell me the person on the left is, and then...
I don't see anybody.
Your father here?
Well, I gave my father.
I'm doing it again. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So, okay. My father, Isaac Dratler, E-I-Z-I-C-K, Dratler, D-R-A-T-L-E-R. My mother, Rosa Davidovich Hershkovitz Dratler, Dratler.
Cutting. Again, state your name and say, I am Solange. You don't have to spell it. And go ahead.
I am Solange Leibovitz. This picture shows again my father, Isaac Dratler, my mother, Rosa Dratler, and 3 of their 4 children, all photographed in Siget, S-I-G-H-T, Transylvania.
Thank you, very good. And could you name the children from left to right?
Okay. Régine, Armand, et Yolande.
Very good. And ready, and go ahead.
This is me, Solange Leibovitz. On the left, it's a school picture, probably in Paris. The middle picture, probably in Normandy. And the last picture is on the side of the house in Couterne, Normandy.
Okay, do you have a guess as to like dates, like years for each of these?
Okay. I think the middle picture and the other one most likely were in 1943, before the liberation.
And the one in front of the house, what year?
Yeah, the one in the middle and the house, 1943.
Okay. And the first one, you're not sure of the date. That's okay.
No,
That's
I
fine.
don't know if it's...
Ready?
Yes.
And go ahead, please.
I am Solange Leibovitz. This is my brother Ludo and my sister Berthe. They were both in Limoges, and the picture of him is before he went into the Resistance, Le Maquis.
About what year would you say this is?
Probably 40, let me see, 43, 40, probably 43, 44.
Okay. Ready, and go ahead, please.
I am Solange Leibovitz. This is my brother Armand, who was in Limoges and Tulle and in jail and also in the hospital with the sisters. My mother, Rosa Dratler, my father, Isaac Dratler, and my sister Yolande, who stayed in Paris.
Okay, and that was from, she said them all from left to right.
Right.
And what year was this, Solange?
1942.
Okay. And go ahead, state your name, and then from left to right in the picture.
Well, it's my brother Armand, the one who was in jail in Tulle and in the Resistance. Armand Dratler, my mother, Rose Dratler, my father, Isaac Dratler, and my brother Ludo Dratler, who was in Limoges and also was in the Resistance.
Okay, very good. And those were all from left to right, she named them.
Yes, and
And
that was in the one part of the courtyard where we lived.
and where was that?
In Paris. At the time, it was 177 Rue de Charenton, Paris 12, but it has been demolished now.
District 12, okay.
Yes,
And what year was this?
1942, during the war.
Excellent. And again, identify yourself, and then from left to right, name the people and where they are and the date, please.
My name is Solange Leibovitz. This is my sister Régine, whose husband was a prisoner of war in Germany. and she later was arrested and so forth. And my brother Ludo in Limoges. This picture was taken in Limoges, most likely in 1942, 43 or 40, probably.
Okay. So again, if you know the drill, your name, and then from left to right, the people.
I'm Solange Leibovitz. The little girl to the left is Nanette, the daughter of the lady who took me by train to Couterne. In the middle, it's Madame Barbier, with whom I stayed for 2.5 years in Normandy. And to the right, that's me in the little black velvet dress, Solange.
And where is this?
In Couterne, Normandy, I guess in front of their house.
Okay, and what year would you say?
Most likely 43. Does it say anything in the back?
Well, hang on a bit. Okay, Solange, it's all you.
Okay. I'm Solange Leibovitz. This is my future husband, a cousin, who was deported from Czechoslovakia. This picture was taken probably in his village, Bedevla, in Czechoslovakia after the war.
Okay, so probably like anytime 1945-ish or so. 40,
Yes.
46, 45. Okay.
Yes, he was liberated January 1945, and he went back home.
Go ahead, please.
I'm Solange Leibovitz. This is my husband, who was a Holocaust survivor in camps, and he joined the American Army during the Korean War, and we were married in Paris and then in the United States.
And when was this picture taken?
Let's see, let me think. Probably while he was in Germany as a, what do you call, what was it?
Interpreter?
As an intelligence agent in the American Army.
Okay, tell you what, I said, okay, starting with your name, we're just doing it one more time, and go ahead.
My name is Solange Leibovitz. This is my husband, Larry Leibovitz, who, after he was deported and came back from camps, emigrated to the United States, where he had uncles, and he joined the American Army during the Korean War, and was sent back to Germany in the Army intelligence.
And the year of this photo?
Before 1952, because he was discharged
Okay.
after